Welcoming you to our December, can't believe it, Policy and Personnel Committee meeting. With me are my fellow committee members, Nan Malconian and Jess Malwani. And with us our superintendent, Dr. Passy, our liaison, Dr. Shields, our district council, or one of them, Mara Harvey, and a few community members. Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Shields.
So you have in the packet the minutes from our last meeting. Those will be on the next board meeting's agenda for acceptance by the full board. By way of a personnel update, as the board's aware, we have a incentive notification in the PWTA contract of December 1st for retirements. So I included to the board yesterday a full list of all 16 retirements that we have among the PWTA members in the district. So you'll see them on the next board agenda to act upon accepting those retirements. A lot of familiar names there, so we're sad to see them go, but happy for their next chapter. And then we'll start the hiring process as we get into the late January, early February range. So item 1.3 is the field trip policy, 4531. That's being brought back with further edits. That has been reviewed by council for your input.
Okay, so, council viewed this last time we were here, we left off, the discussion was how do we make this equitable for students who face financial hardship in going on a field trip. And the comment was made by, I believe it was Dr. Passy, that the district is supposed to be paying for all the field trips. Well, let's put it this way, that it was not supposed to be the burden on the parent to pay for the field trips. That somehow somebody in the district or the HSA or some entity would find a way to make sure that no child was excluded from the field trip due to financial hardship. So that revision was made here in the the fourth paragraph. Right? The last line says, in addition, no student will be excluded from a field trip due to financial reasons. But there were, you saw some other things, Ms. Harvey, where you made edits. And so.
Yeah, and one of the things I think, and I think we spoke a little bit about it last time, is there's the curricular field trips, which are part of the curriculum, and then various districts, including Fort Washington, they have some of these overnight or abroad field trips. And, kind of keeping it separate, because those are not curricular or part of the curriculum, but they are district-run field trips. So that was one of the things I think we need to make sure we try to kind of keep them in two different pockets. And really due to the fact that when you're dealing with the curricular field trips, it is part of the curriculum, it's part of the, your educational purposes, and that's why when, that we also spoke about other things that they should be doing, is say someone decides, I don't want my kid to go off property, I want them to stay, not because of money, it just, I'm not comfortable with it, that they should be, because they can't miss that piece of the curriculum, because, like I know, often we say with regard to like Six Flags, it's physics and things like that. Some of those things that it's pretty standard. It's a little bit drawn out, but most of those.
Not sure that's done here,
yeah,
but
right.
As an example.
That's an example. I know often you see
okay.
the kid going to and they say, oh, it's because it's physics. But most of the field trips, it's you're talking about the medieval times, and maybe you're going to medieval times, or maybe you're going to Old Bethpage Restoration to talk about something to show someone instead of just talking about it. So that's where you want to make sure that you're not excluding anyone. But then you also have these international or different trips that are not part of the curriculum. I mean, it is alongside. So often the Spanish club or the Spanish, a Spanish group will go to Spain.
Or here, France or
France, where you're using the language and there's definitely benefits to the students, but it's not part of the curriculum. So it's not if someone doesn't go on that trip that they are missing curriculum.
Okay. Any questions from any of the committee members? on this or regulation?
And then with regard to the regulation, I think I put a note, is we really should look at what we have, because I'm assuming, and maybe it's a bad assumption, is that especially with these overnight or other things, that we have procedures that are in place. And we should just look at them and make sure that they're good, and kind of incorporate them maybe into the regulation. Because like right now, there isn't a lot of information. The day-to-day field trips, I think, is pretty much, covered. It's the time, the things that you need to know is the timing for buses, the timing when teachers need to give. It's a little bit more complicated, the overnight and or abroad.
Okay. The only question I have in terms of what you did was in that line that I read, it says due to financial reasons. Can we change that to hardship? I mean, does it have to be, is reason too broad? Does it matter?
So it doesn't have to be a hardship. That's the problem. So
Okay.
it's meant to be that if, someone says, well, I'm not paying and I'm not doing this, I can't, I don't want to, it's against my, whatever. So I don't think hardship really captures.
Hardship is too restrictive.
It's too restrictive.
Okay. Now for the committee, one of the reasons that we wanted to bring this policy back was we wanted to be sure that there was equity or parity or consistency or uniformity among different classrooms, schools in terms of the elementary school, houses in terms of Weber. One of the things I've noticed as a board member when we approve these trips in whatever agenda they hear, is that there are some schools or some grades where there are more field trips than others, whether it's because of an Ed Foundation grant or whatever it is. In houses, there are some houses where it seems there are more field trips than others. And we were struggling with, as a board, with how do we ensure more parity, more equity, so that our students have so that all of our students are able to benefit from the robust experience of a field trip. I mean, I can tell you, I went to elementary school a really long time ago. I remember my field trips. I don't remember much else. I remember my field trips. And I know that's the case for many students, whether it's to a museum or the Bethpage, Restoration Village. So is there a way, is it appropriate to put something in this policy that says that we will at least strive for parity? I don't know how that gets done because the board really can't oversee what goes on in a building. We just approve the money, so that's for you all to do. I don't know if you can answer this question on the fly or if you want to think about it and add language, if you think language should be in here. I guess for the committee, should language to that effect be in here somewhere to some extent?
I think if we do include language around the uniformity of experience at the elementary and middle school levels, it would rightly belong in the first paragraph, which states the board's philosophical view of the value of field trips. Because if that is our view on the value of that field trips do have integral value to a student's educational experience, then all students should have access to such experiences. Now, I would defer to our administration and our building administration to let us know what the realities of that are in terms of how it can be implemented so that the language we include can be put into practice, right? Like, do the field trips have to be the same at every elementary school for an equitable, enriching experience and for the curricular goals at a specific grade level to be achieved? Probably not. But kids should have access to those opportunities and resources. So I'm inclined to include philosophical language around that. I'm just not sure what that language is and what the practical realities of it look like.
Right, because we also don't want to penalize, I mean, there are some teachers who have embraced, I'll just say Ed Foundation, because that's where a lot of the field trip money comes from, who have embraced grant writing. Of course, we talked about this as well over the past couple of years. How do we get more grant writing opportunities. We can't force staff to write grants. We can only say, here's what's available. Some educators are very motivated to apply for the grants for this money. I'll just leave it at that. And so so we can't force it. How do we as a district, because there's outside money, right? It's not every teacher is given a certain amount of money, and here's what you can do with it in terms of taking a field trip. Here's the money, it's out there, anybody who wants to go get it can go get it, kind of thing. So how do we do this on behalf of the students without putting a cudgel on the teachers? I don't know how to make that balance as a
The
board.
other consideration perhaps, aside from paragraph 1, maybe is paragraph 3 where we talk about the superintendent's role. That maybe we include language there that speaks to analyzing field trip like data to decide if, or to influence equity across schools and or houses.
Yeah, because, and then the flip side is, for those students who are getting the benefit of the field trips, we don't want them not to get the benefit, but they're getting a benefit where the students aren't. So it's a,
So I would not recommend putting any kind of, thou shall have equity, not because I don't think everyone should have equity, but, there's other things that come into place, like, a teacher may say, I'm not comfortable, doing it, and it may be very legitimate, or I'm not able to for whatever reason. So you don't wanna have it that thou shall, because then there's no, wiggle room. But you could say, that it is the desire to attempt to have all,
Even when practical,
you know.
when practical, there should be equity of experiences for students, something like that.
You strive for,
Do you think it's better in the first paragraph or the third? Or both?
I think the first, where you're talking about the philosophy.
so,
Because you're right, the reality is they're not going to be identical. But
No, of course
hopefully-
not.
But hopefully they're going to be comparable.
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
because there are definitely students in this district who go through school having had either very few or no field trip experiences because of the luck of the draw of where they are, what building they're in, or which classroom, or which house.
And I know Weber had in the past tried to sort of compensate for that by doing grade level field trips, that every grade level every year went on a field trip. I don't think that happened this year, but there are ways that this has been done in the past in the district, and good things are happening. I think we maybe just need to include the aspiration in this policy to make sure that it continues to happen.
Okay,
I think the phrase you used before, strive for, is a nice one.
okay. Okay, so can we then, three of us can work on, since we've discussed it here, we can work on that introductory language to put in the first paragraph, and then put this on for a first read? It doesn't have to come back. It's been hanging out there a long time, and let's get this baby.
sorry, I put a
No,
little.
that's not you.
No, no,
Mistake of last week.
It's been years with that.
That was not a reference.
No, I
It was a
know.
reference to
Yeah.
it not getting out of committee, literally for years.
Too many other things have
Kicked it aside. Okay, fun, grading.
Yes, so 4710, as the trustees know, you received feedback from the board on the direction in which to take your next steps. Further edits have been made to the draft that you have in your packet. And I know the conversation will continue.
Yes, okay, so there's one thing here that's, two things that are new. One is the document that's entitled Committee Version for 12/5/2025. This is the result of the committee getting the board's direction to start at the very broad, board-like direction in the policy, And that's what we did, with one exception, which was under the weighting section, which is where we got a little bit specific, and I'll get to that in a second. Based on comments from administration, it didn't come out of our own head. And we followed with fidelity the outline that we presented here at our last meeting, committee meeting, that was approved by the full board at the last full board meeting, and then just fleshed it out to reflect philosophy, board philosophy. This is a lot of stuff here. Because of the very tight turnaround between the November meeting and this meeting, I feel like we had about 3 days. The committee accomplished a lot, but administration did not get this version. We were not able to give this to administration until Monday, we had the Thanksgiving holiday, you know, this was a lot of stuff that's been thrown at administration in a very short amount of time. So I will say here publicly, nobody on this committee expects either of the two of you to know exactly what you want to say about every single sentence of what we've provided as a draft. So we're here today to present this, to get a sense as to if you happen to have seen anything glaring, and then to take this to the full board at our next full board meeting, which will be on the 16th of December, to make sure we're heading in the right direction as a committee with the full board. To find out, okay, we started broad, do we really want to get into specifics? The specifics we talked about last time, it's kind of chicken and egg. When we were looking at Hewlett, when we were looking at Plainview, Old Bethpage, there may have been one or two others. There was a lot of specificity in the policy itself that we thought, well, it could be regulation, because the board isn't really saying, here's the point assignment we want you to give to weighting, and here's how we want you to calculate the vowel and the sound, and so, or not calculate, but arrive at who will be. And we said, like, this seems to be really coming from administration and or staff and be incorporated into policy. And so the next steps after this would be to say, what aspects of that type of information would we want to see in policy, if anything? So that's just a basic overview for where we are right now. The other new thing is that in the philosophy, where we highlight the school districts from which we pulled themes and ideas, you will see there's one, we call it Long Beach, California. Long Beach, we understand it's not in New York, it isn't even on the East Coast, but provided a real wealth of information, we thought, as a committee, as to very broad topics. So late work, missed work, things we hadn't really thought about as a committee that I think members of the board maybe hadn't thought about, just themes that should be included within a grading policy. Long Beach goes into very specific stuff also in its policy itself. We don't expect that to appear in the policy in terms of what Long Beach has said, but it could provide a template for what could be included on the Port Washington, unique to Port Washington. Have I missed anything before I go on?
I don't think so, that was comprehensive.
Okay, good. Accurate, though.
And accurate.
Okay, that's what I like accurate. And so the only, we do have some comments as committee members that we just had in our own heads to pose thoughts, to pose to the two of you. And so I know, Ms. Malwani, you had some comments. I'll let you start, and then if you don't get to my comments, then I'll just.
No, my comments were actually fairly few by the time we got to the end of this exercise.
Okay.
And I expect they'll come up
Okay.
in your comments.
So
But let's-
places like, does this make sense, or?
Yeah, I mean, we had certain questions, for instance, in the core principles section, the 4th paragraph, where we talk about students being graded in relation to established learning standards and their own achievement and not as compared to the work of other students.
It's on page 2, so
And
that
on
would be the
page 2,
third paragraph
sorry, on page 2,
It's okay.
not being compared to the work of other students in a particular class. To me, that's clear, and I should preface this by saying, you know, I have seen all of these principles in action in my own children's classrooms, so I know that, you know, best practices are happening, and the goal here is to ensure that best practices are becoming standard operating procedure, right? So I've seen what this looks like in a classroom. Does this make sense? It makes sense to me because I'm kind of in it and seeing it daily. But does it make sense to the reader, and does it make sense to our administrators in terms of how this is executed? So it's questions like that.
So are you asking, does it make sense not to compare students to each other? Or are you saying,
Well,
does this language clearly convey that we do not want students to be compared to each other?
I think both of those are questions. So pedagogically, does this make sense? Is this best practice, right? This is not the same as grading on a curve, which is sort of renorming an entire class and not comparing them to each other. It's literally saying, you know, we're not going to hold up this one essay and say, this is a perfect essay and everybody is graded against this essay of this student. Is that best practice? Is that what should be happening in our classrooms? And if so, does this make sense?
Well, a teacher might provide a model, of course, for, you know, to your example. They might provide a model response and say to students, let's talk about why this is a model response. But I think that model response should be based off of a criteria, which you've outlined here. And then, so therefore, the grading is really based on alignment to the criteria, not necessarily alignment to the model response.
Or I think the example was more like Johnny wrote a great essay for this assignment. It hasn't been given as a model in advance. It wasn't Johnny last year wrote this and here's your model and here are the criteria and here's the rubric against which you'll be graded. This is Johnny's paper, he did a great job, you're all graded against this. Is that what we're trying to avoid in our classrooms? And if so, does this language capture that? It sounds like it.
Yeah, I haven't necessarily seen that.
That's what I was gonna say, huh?
I haven't necessarily seen
I
that.
have
Wild, that you've seen that? That's,
I have seen I've seen
Wow.
that, I've seen, you know, not that, so,
okay.
Right, in other words, we don't want to say to a student, be more like this person.
Right.
This is an example to give you a sense of what it is, but we're not going to compare you to this child.
correct, we're not comparing our students to each other, we're comparing our students to their own progress and achievement and relevant established subjective criteria.
Yeah, I read this as, with respect to your first comment regarding curving of grades. That's how I read this.
Okay.
That, and maybe that was a misread of what the intention was. But when I read this, I thought, okay, this is stating that we're not, that we're not applying curves in classroom grading, which again, I don't know if that's happening.
So how do we make this clear that we're not referring to curves? We're trying to avoid highlighting a particular student's work and telling other student and making sure the educator does not compare all the other students against that student's work.
It doesn't even need to be necessarily explicit, right? Like, I don't expect most or many teachers are actively doing that and saying this student is the standard against which you'll all be graded. But in practice, is that happening and should it be happening, right?
Does it actually become muddied if the way we have it, should it stop at achievement period?
I knew you were gonna.
That's fine, yeah.
That same thought.
Right. Okay, good, that works.
Yep.
Okay, the next one is under timely feedback.
Yeah, I think that was actually Nan's question around the language, around reducing anxiety.
Oh, is that still in here?
Yes, so the sentence, it's in
Oh, I
the
see it.
very middle
Okay.
paragraph.
Yes, yes,
It
yes.
also promotes predictability, which helps to reduce student anxiety and fosters a learning environment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mine's off. I don't even know that phrase needs to be in there. I just,
The
I'm not
also
sure
phrase.
it offers us much.
Mhm.
And it's also, I find it subjective. I always try to think of the language as objective. And when you bring in wishy-washy language, I don't know, I find it changes the sentiment of the thought.
It doesn't seem necessary to the point that's being made in the paragraph, which is that every graded assignment, homework, project, and assessment must be returned to students in a timely fashion in order for them to be meaningful in the learning process. That's the key, that's the key sentence there.
Okay, good. And that's out.
So the sentence or just that phrase?
That whole sentence, from it to progress.
Okay.
So actually I sort of consolidated all of our comments. So the next one was on page, sorry, I'm not looking at the hard copy.
Maybe 4?
It was the one around regents.
Yes, that's
In
page 4, first
opportunities,
paragraph.
yeah, page 4, first paragraph. So the question I think we had in developing this draft was really around how specific does the philosophy itself need to get around standardized assessments, particularly because we only cite the regents in this paragraph, in the entire policy. And some of the potential approaches to addressing regents exams are incompatible with the desire for uniformity, right?
So how is it incompatible?
So we had discussed that one option is there's the option that's been proposed that's on the table for this year, which is to not count regents exams at all. But again, I feel like this is getting into that question of like, how specific, do we want to go there even in this conversation right now? Or should we be addressing this at the level of standardized, the inclusion or incorporation of standardized assessments in student grades, whether cumulative or formative? And the approaches may be different, and we may want to address it that way. But my question is around the broadness or specificity with which we want to even engage in this here.
So, I can't remember what was said. Other than regents exams, are there any standardized tests that are included in a student's grade? I don't remember
Just the
flags.
flax
There's
was
the flags and student
flags.
again, not with the changes that were proposed or that are being implemented.
Okay. So then I wanna make sure I understand what you're saying, that we're not talking about flags in this paragraph, but we are talking, which are part of a student's grade.
Right.
But we are talking about regents exams, which are part of a student's grade. And so we are being inconsistent in how we are addressing,
The
in
use of,
choosing
yeah.
to address regents exams. Okay,
The use of cumulative standardized assessment.
okay.
Well, the other thing we want to remember too is when you're looking at a policy, we're looking at, if you're adding that level of detail, you're adding what happens today. There could be a different test that comes into play in the future, so then you'd have to remember to go back and that's one of the problems of putting too much detail in a policy, is because then you have to go back and change it when things change. So say AP exams, become something that become part of the grade, where, it's not done now, but in the future there's some change or something. Or a test that doesn't exist right now.
But one thing that, but one piece that is an interesting thing just to consider is whether or not the policy wants to take a position on double testing, which would be the reason to include regents exams and/or final exams, meaning, does the board want to leave that to regulation, or do they want to consider that as part of policy? Whether or not we administer essentially 2 cumulative exams to students.
I would say the last sentence in that paragraph is very prescriptive. The first 2 are rather general in nature. So I think to your question, Ms. Malani, is, do you want to stay broad or do you want to get specific? You're saying in that last sentence that Regencies should be included in the calculation of grades.
Final assessed grades, including Regents exam scores, if Regents are used, will be applied uniformly. So clearly, we need to rework this paragraph, to figure out what is it we want. First, what do we want to target? And then what do you want to say about it? That's what I'm, because because Regents were the hot button, right? I think we got intense about, not only had intensity, but intent as well, to try to address that in policy. And our main goal is to do no harm, right? I've been saying this forever. So how do we make sure that happens without singling out Regents exams? Because we also want FLACS to do no harm. Any kind of standardized test really doesn't come from the district, was my understanding of what we wanted to make sure. It's a test that has to be given. Eventually we'll have Regents, we'll have pathways, but that gets muddy, because there will be some students who will no longer have to take Regents exams because they'll be on a different pathway. To my understanding, that's what will happen. And so we need this paragraph to stand the test of time, at least within the next couple of years. And how do we do that? And so where do we find that answer? We come back to the drawing board. I don't know that we're prepared to do that right here and right now.
There are a couple of important things to maintain as you consider how to revise this. So for example, the same assessment will be given to all sections of the same course. If you keep a section on final examinations, I think that's important to maintain. And then there was, and will be uniformly and applied uniformly and consistently in the calculation of final course grades.
Mm-hmm.
So those concepts, I think, should remain, because they speak to, there's a through line from the philosophy in the beginning of the policy to this,
Yes.
in my view.
Yes.
So for example, in that last sentence of that paragraph, you could just take out the part in the middle between the dashes.
Just final assessment grades.
Will be applied uniformly and consistently in the calculation.
You don't have one class that it counts as 10% and another class that counts as 20, or
Or it doesn't count at all.
or it doesn't count at all.
That keeps your philosophical approach and away
Does.
from the specific exams.
Does.
So it does also sound like we need to somehow address the utility of cumulative standardized assessments in the context of final exams. To Dr. Passi's point around double testing, if that's something the board thinks is important to avoid, then that's something we should consider including. Perhaps not specifically about Regents or FLACS or whatever test may come up in lieu of those, right?
It could be a simple statement such as, when a standardized assessment is a requirement of the course, because remember, Regents exams and FLACS are still requirements of the course. That an additional cumulative assessment will not be administered.
So that assumes that all of the educators teaching Regents levels courses believe that the Regents are a valid instrument for assessing their classroom's work.
No, we're only dealing with double testing in this. I was only trying to deal with the question of if a student is going to sit for a Regents exam in June, should they also sit for, which is a requirement of the course?
Yeah.
We know that. Should they also sit for a final exam in June?
Right, well, I guess that's my question. If a teacher, let's say, is teaching a course but doesn't believe the Regents, let's say the Regents teach to perhaps a lower standard than that teacher teaches to in the classroom, and their cumulative assessment would look different than the Regents, is that fair, right?
And to along those lines, for some reason, I mean, my memory's fading now about what high school was like, but are there any AP classes or honors levels classes that have a Regents exam but also have an AP exam?
Yes.
So that, by nature, those kids are gonna be double tested. They're gonna have to take the AP, they're gonna have to take the Regents exam. And I think there's usually no other classroom exam that's given. That would just be cruel and unusual punishment.
One is in May, one is in June.
Right, and so those kids are being double tested, so in that respect, we would have to say for any we'd have to find the language that doesn't preclude the students from being able to take the AP test.
Well, it would have to be kind of the exception of when there's two standardized tests for the same class. And then you could use an example, like I know it was AP
physics, yeah.
physics, or I think algebra.
AP Bio.
It was
But,
one I did.
I think it's interesting because when a student is preparing for an AP exam in May, and then in June is preparing for a Regents exam, oftentimes what will happen is that the teacher will go back after May and fill in gaps in terms of topics that are covered in the Regents curriculum but are not prominent in the AP curriculum. They'll go back and they'll cover those gaps and then administer the Regents exam in June. What I was talking about was if a student is sitting for a Regents exam on June 15th, should they sit for a final exam on June 10th or June 20th? You know, the proximity of the exams, I think matters in terms of stress load for students.
Right, so it would be something like maybe like not including AP exams, we would have to carve out something so it's clear that
Well, I think
I think it's a
it's a
stand-
locally developed, they will not be administered a locally
Locally
developed
developed.
It's
cumulative assessment.
Right.
and is, as a board person, I don't know that I am capable, I don't know that I am competent to say that that's the right thing I don't know what the right thing to do is.
Well, but this is we're not getting into I don't think the board and the policy would be getting into whether or not the final exam has more merit than the Regents exam and whether or not. The question is simply related to double testing, which I think, as it relates to students' mental health, is something that is something that would be appropriate for a policy,
Okay,
in my view.
okay. So,
Some may disagree, but in my view, I do think that would be appropriate because it's addressing a potential pain point.
well, the double testing, and in fact, when the Regents were turning over with Common Core and these kids in there was one cohort that every year had to take 2 different Regents exams, not even a local exam, but 2 different Regents exams, do you remember that? One cohort, every year, the way
Yes.
the state changed to Common Core, it was brutal, and that really opened my eyes. Okay, so can we agree this paragraph needs to be reworked? I don't know if we're gonna have a reworking in time. We won't have an approved reworking in time for the upcoming board meeting, but at least we know this is something we need to work on as an organization here. Okay? In addition to other things, but this is just what we're highlighting. It's not to say there isn't anything else in here.
Yes, I think the next question that came up was
Grading is a
grading
disciplinary.
right, grading is not a disciplinary tool in page 4, start of the 4th paragraph. I mean, that's an important philosophical statement, and I think we were torn in the language, you know, and throughout struggled with language around shall must statements versus statements of philosophical sort of fact, right? That we as are philosophical facts. So I guess it's a question, it's a language question, but it's also a substance question because, you know, is it helpful? Is it effective in policy to make a statement like grading is not a disciplinary tool? Does that guide administration sufficiently in crafting regulation around how to utilize grading effectively?
So I will say, and this is not to be dispositive, but in our current policy, we say grading shall not be used as a disciplinary tool.
Yeah.
So, are you saying that statement?
I think it's just a broad question around like where we utilize shall must versus where we just state beliefs. It's not, I mean, right, where we state philosophical beliefs as what they are, right?
And that's where we got into problems where we are now is that our policy from several years ago, the district aims for or strives for consistency, which was not interpreted to mean there must be consistency.
Right.
So
So I think the difference there, if we're using that as an example, would be the district strives for consistency versus the district delivers consistent, you know, grading practices across whatever, right? So those are very different statements because there's no, you know, there's no massaging. Grading is not a disciplinary tool. If somebody was to use it.
There shouldn't be, because there are, you know, commissioners' decisions that center around this. It's, you know, this is, it's why it's in the NISBA sample policy. There shouldn't be any ambiguity around that point.
Right, and that's really where it comes in sometimes is participation. So teachers will say, okay, well, I would have given 2 points in participation today, but, you know, Johnny, you were bad today, so you're not getting those 2 points. Now, if he was bad and didn't do their work,
Right.
oh, you know, but if they participated and then was bad later on, they should still get the participation because it's not discipline. There's other ways to handle that inappropriate behavior, but it shouldn't be in dealing with grading.
and we addressed that. We talked
that.
about behavior versus I don't say merit mastery. So can we revert to what we had in our original policy, which is grading shall not be used as a disciplinary tool?
I mean, yes, sure. I just think throughout, as we discuss this, that I think for me that will come up, the difference of like where shall must is actually helpful or harmful to a policy. The next question was around weighting. Again, page 4, first paragraph of the weighting section. I think this was just the conversation we were talking about earlier, sort of how do we address the why of weighting as we have done for all of the other core principles in this? Because right now, this section on weighting courses and weighting, ranking, and GPA is really an outlier because these are not generally philosophical views. They are specific practices. So in addressing them, we've tried to address the why. Why are these practices in place? But we haven't done that for weighting.
Well, the first sentence says, we recognize that course weighting can be a positive tool that encourages students to take courses beyond those required for graduation. And we actually got stuck in
that's what I'm saying,
that
like-
too. Somewhere in there, there was language about rigor.
Yeah.
And do you wanna say what you thought about the rigor part of it? Cause I don't wanna speak for you, which is why that language doesn't appear here now.
Well, you and I think, kind of landed there and somewhat,
Brought Jess along.
yeah. Some of the language in some of the samples, talked about, courses that were considered challenging and that they deserve a particular weight. And if we're living up to our aspirations as a district and challenging students to achieve their fullest potential, that means every child is in a challenging course. So that made me bristle because it's not consistent with what we're trying to achieve as a school district. So I was asking for that to be removed, and then we landed at this recommendation that we found from Oyster Bay, which said that it's just encouraging students to take courses beyond requirements for graduation, which is more comfortable for me. And I guess my question to the two of you is that a good place to be? Should we massage that even more?
Is that the right language?
Right.
Because we were thinking, well, an AP exam, excuse me, is certainly very challenging for most of the students who take it. There are some students for whom being in a Regents level class is very challenging, but being in a Regents level class is currently required for graduation, but being in an AP level class is not required for graduation.
Yeah.
So we're trying to find ways to take the rigor and the challenging part out of it and assign a different personality, for lack of a better word, a different characterization to these classes that are being weighted.
I think you're philosophical, I think that is a philosophical statement that you're making in paragraph 1 of that section, that is setting a tone, that we do want to offer these opportunities for kids. And in the process, the weighting adjustment may encourage students to go beyond what's expected as a minimum.
Okay.
Now, is there more, like, I know with the rigor, like, I mean, it's usually people say like, oh, well, an AP exam is harder, but that's not necessarily accurate, because someone who is the regular normal class may be harder for them
Yes.
than the AP class is for someone else. Is there anything, is there more work, like, or, like, kind of going in that thing, like, is there more to be done in the class?
Is there any objective measure?
Measure, like,
Beyond difficulty.
because that could be something that if it's accurate.
Yes, so typically you have, the way that most high schools operate, and Schreiber's included in this, is that, courses that meet the state requirements receive no additional weighting. Courses that exceed the state requirements receive incremental weighting. So it's really not about the level of rigor for the child, it's about the standards in the course,
So,
the curricular standards.
So
then
to
we
take
kinda
courses
got it.
beyond those that meet the state requirements,
It's really the
In terms of-
standards.
in terms of it's the standards within the course, it's not necessarily a graduation requirement.
Yeah, it's these, in other words, like the standards for AP Physics are incrementally more robust than the standards for Regents Physics.
Okay.
But both Regents Physics and AP Physics fulfill the state requirement for physics, if you were to use it as a, fourth science credit to receive a diploma designation.
So is this language consistent with what you're describing, or should we make modifications to
Yeah,
it?
I think we need to modify it
Yes, I do.
to address standards versus requirements.
Yes.
Learning standards. And I think, if we are going to keep this section in the policy, it's probably important to add a sentence around where responsibility for the weighting system resides in terms of establishing, maintaining, and changing it.
And that's the reason that I think, Jessica, that in some places you saw boards codify what the weighting was exactly in policy. This way, if ever that were to be changed, it would follow a transparent, open meetings law process that policy changes follow.
but we also do have to remember that we do have clauses in the teacher's contract that does kind of come into play here.
And they say what?
So they
If you know
have,
off the top of your head.
I know they have the committee where they have to be part of
Yes.
the determination. So we would not necessarily be able to just dictate certain things. We have to have them.
No, if you were to memorialize anything, if you memorialized the current practice, for example,
Yes.
And just to be clear, nor would we want to.
No, oh, no, no,
We would not want to unilaterally
I wanna make sure that we don't put
determine
anything in
right.
policies
Correct.
that are
For
not
everybody
able
listening,
to.
We're not
No,
sitting here
thank
to
you.
do that. Yeah, okay, so,
And I think that's a question for the board when we bring this to them, because that's the level of specificity that we need direction on. We can go there, but is that where the board sees this policy going, or does it rest here and with a statement of responsibility and process?
right, because we talked about that chicken egg thing, that in those policies, Hewlett, Plainview, Bethpage come to mind, that we were imagining without calling those boards if they would even remember, and asking, well, how did you get that specificity in your policy? Did you board members decide, or did this, in terms of the language of the specificity, of the specifics, or did this come as a recommendation from administration, from educators, that you then wove into the policy? And so, yes, bless you. And so that's where the next paragraph comes into play, I think, where we cite that the current Schreiber practice, we're literally codifying that into the policy. And so this is the only place, I think, where we've taken a specific regulation-looking kind of thing and put it into policy.
Right, and I guess the question for us and for administration is that,
Excuse me.
is that necessary? Is the
Yeah.
codification of that in policy necessary?
Mm-hmm.
Does it help anyone? Does it clarify anything for the community? I'm not sold on this because it's so, out of, it's
an outlier.
It's an outlier, and it's inconsistent with the rest of this policy as it's written.
And this will appear in the Schreiber handbook, there's some place. And Weber also, I imagine, isn't there GPA at Weber? Just some, isn't there, when you take a class, a high school level class at Weber, there's no GPA?
Those courses do get factored into
They
your,
get factored into the high school GPA.
Right, so that's also a calculation that's happening though,
At the high school.
at the high school, but from Weber.
As a product of the courses that we're
As a
taking.
product,
away.
yes.
Yeah.
So even this, even putting this paragraph in here omits whatever was happening at Weber with a high school level class.
well,
Because we say
include-
high school student, if we say
Right.
GPA shall be calculated and we don't say high school
Right.
student.
Right, so I think this paragraph being here is problematic for more than one reason.
I think it's a very, very specific
Yeah.
part of the practice of running a school.
So we omit this?
I'm comfortable omitting the section on GPA. The question around valedictorian and salutatorian is there is a philosophical statement in here that we as a district do not believe in ranking students by GPA with the exception of these two positions. Is that something that belongs codified in policy?
I think yes. I think yes, and I actually, even though this got specific in terms of not including phys ed and health, and order that the Schreiber High School students must have attended from the beginning of their freshman year, even though to me that sounds like regulation, because this is talking about really the child's whole trajectory through the district, I'm very comfortable keeping this paragraph here. Even though GPA is not calculated in the elementary school, I understand that, but to me, this is, even though it's based on GPA at the high school, to me, this is a culmination of a 13-year for most students, even, I'm not making sense, scratch that.
I mean,
I like the paragraph.
I could see a case for eliminating basically like the middle of the paragraph and just making the philosophical statement and then saying in order to be considered for either of these recognitions, right? Students must have attended Schreiber High School from the beginning of their freshman year.
Okay, so where would you end the first sentence?
I would just end it after GPA and then start back up again in order.
When they will be selected, but
The only thing I would advise though is that, it's protective to have in policy how we determine the valedictorian and salutatorian. In that if there were challenges to the selection of the valedictorian or salutatorian, it's protective to have it outlined in policy in this way. And again, it also then would necessitate a very transparent process to change. If we ever were to change the way in which, or propose changes to the way in which we calculate valedictorian and salutatorian, that's the only thing to consider, for the board to consider.
And also, some districts do have policies on valedictorian, and salutatorian.
Separate, standalone policy.
Standalones, yeah. So you're just including it within this policy.
okay. So then we can take out the part about phys ed and health or leave that in?
Well,
That's very-
is that the current practice?
Yes.
Is that phys ed? So if we are codifying the current practice, in the policy, I would keep the current practice, because then it makes it sure it's clear that it's it's all of it, not just pieces of
And
it.
just so you know, the reason for that is because there's an extra health requirement at Schreiber in addition to the state level.
Okay.
And some students, because of the way their schedules fall, have to take that in 11th grade, where they could have pushed it off till 12th grade, right? And that means they can't take an AP level class or something that would have bumped their grade up, where they were capable of taking that class, which now puts them at a disadvantage GPA-wise from the student who can, because this, the competition comes into a razor-thin margin, right? And these kids know who
They
they
know
are,
it.
they
It's
know what they
wild.
want, right?
Yeah.
We're not talking about the majority of the 1,600 kids in the school, we're talking about a real select few. But as a fairness issue, it's because of their schedules. Every student knows they want as high a GPA as they can possibly get if they're aiming for the Val Sal. And if because of their schedule, they're required to take this non-state mandated but district mandated health course in 11th grade, they can't take that bumped up class
where then they
until
also
their
get-
12th grade. And at the end of 12th grade, they may have had a higher GPA, but because of when everything's calculated, they don't, right? So it got messy, and so that's why the sentence is in there.
Take it off the table.
So I have a question. Based on that conversation we just had about student behavior, why do we have this district code of conduct piece in here?
And in compliance with the district's code of,
Sorry, you're talking about the third paragraph on the page under academic achievement, or?
No, the bottom, still Val Sal,
Oh,
and their compliance.
no, with the district's
Is
code.
there pieces, there may be a piece in that policy that says that you can't have discipline and be Val-Sal?
Does a
because,
student's record, a disciplinary record, preclude
Like
them
preclude them
from?
from having,
being of Sal, so,
that's what I would assume based on
I
that.
don't know what that means.
So if someone got suspended and
Yeah,
had something on their
I've never
record,
seen it applied.
I don't,
I mean, it does not, I mean.
Never seen an impact.
But-
You're usually not talking about the people who are worried about it, but I actually have had it.
but it's not outside the realm of possibility.
Yes.
And I guess as a
Yeah.
philosophical question, do we want,
You can't be. You just
what
burned
is
down
a
the school.
valedictorian? Is it the person with the highest GPA? Is it the person with the highest GPA who also has been, an all-around,
But how do we determine their compliance? Is it a child that had a bad day and threw a french fry?
But including any kind of disciplinary measure in the determination of Val-Sal is completely incompatible with our previous philosophical
true.
statements on how students are graded. So if this is based solely on your GPA, it should be based solely on your GPA and your academic achievement and performance, and should not factor in disciplinary measures.
So what we do need to do then it's decided to take that piece out of it, is we do need to look at that policy and make sure that there's nothing in there that says,
In the practice in the handbook.
in
to
the
make sure,
practice,
right.
in the handbooks and things, if it's GPA, that's it. You could have burned down the school. I always use it, great. You could have burned down the school, but if you have the highest GPA, you are the
And that's the
valedictorian.
question, and that's the question.
But again, to the point, can someone say, I remember, Mary threw that French fry, she got a referral to the principal's office.
I think that's not gonna,
That's
that's not gonna tip.
You're usually talking, so I'm gonna say, it's usually a document, when you're talking about middle school up, if there's any kind of referral, usually it's in the student management system or whatever system you guys use, in that there was a referral to the dean, or there was a suspension or detention or things like that.
I think I can see a distinction here. In getting a grade, you're showing your mastery of the subject matter, that you know your stuff. And if you act out or whatever it is, that does not negate your mastery. I see Val and Sal as a privilege and not a right. I see earning the grade that demonstrates your mastery is a right. It's not a privilege. Val Sal is a privilege. So, because we don't have to have a Val Sal.
No,
If
you
you can get your grade, you should get the grade that shows your level of mastery. That should not be taken away from you. But Val Sal to me is we don't have to. Like, I think Newsday forces us to, or because there's a breakfast, but it's not a requirement, right? We don't have to do it. And I can see a distinction where being Val Sal is not just about your GPA, but also about just your whole, your
Do you
record.
represent the institution?
Correct.
Okay, but
correct.
this language,
policy-
this
right.
language is not clear on that.
We don't address the why we do val sal and we don't rank, we simply address the negative, which is we don't believe in ranking. So do we need to address the why do we have this and why
Yes,
do we believe this is necessary? And I
Yes.
think that's
Beyond the Newsday.
what do
a
we-
thing that reasonable people can disagree on
Yes.
too. And
What do we mean by compliance?
right.
If you wish, you can just pull it out and have a separate policy if you feel the need. Because we don't have a
No, yeah.
policy, we have a practice
Right.
that is consistent and it's written, it's defined, it's public. So you don't have to include it here if you don't want to, but as Dr. Posse was saying,
There's a protection to it.
it does
Yeah.
provide a benefit if you're able to.
And the same benefit would be as if it's a separate policy.
Right?
Yeah.
It does need to be held up in this if you feel like it's too specific for just the high school is the point.
I like the protection that it offers. As a board member, I like the protection that it offers. I'm wondering if maybe we look and see what Val Sal policies look like and see if there's any kind of philosophical language that can be teased out of that to be dropped in here. Thoughts?
Yeah, I just don't like the word compliance, because I think it's
Okay.
too vague. If we were deciding that it's about the code of conduct as well, then I think we have to be careful about how we apply it.
So in the way that I distinguish between not attributing a student's behavior to their mastery and their grades, but then bringing in the code of culture, character, and conduct here, what is the reason for having a VOWS? I mean, what is is it really just GPA, or is there?
Yeah, you know what, by the time the valedictorian and salutatorian are selected, they're already well along in the college process. So they will notify their colleges that they've received the designation, and maybe it moves the needle for them. There are schools that do not have valedictorians and salutatorians, and they do that through policy. They select honor students that can speak at graduation, but it really is it's really perhaps a relic. I don't know.
I mean, I think what we are clear on is that whatever the reason for it, the designation is not subjective. there are no subjective measures that are included in this designation,
Correct.
whether or not discipline has been included in the past. So I think rather than use language around compliance with the code of conduct, which could be read as subjective, we simply take the language from whatever the practice is or exclude it if it is not documented in the practice in the handbook, and then we've addressed it.
Okay,
Like, we should define it or exclude it.
okay, so we will rework this paragraph.
We had three, but really two more comments, and the last one is kind of a bigger discussion. Page 5, in processing and changing student grades, which was taken directly from existing policy language. There are clauses around review, annual review of grade changes, changes that are made to student grades after the fact, after they've been reported to the system. And the sort of like the permission structure for changing grades, and another annual review of those permissions and access rights. So it doesn't specify who is responsible for that review and what that review entails. It should.
Yeah, this was an
Right.
omission from the previous.
This was an omission in the
policy,
previous
and
one,
rereading.
and particularly with regard to permissions, we felt that it shouldn't be anybody who was in the permission structure, right? For the purposes of internal controls, right? It should be somebody, you don't want the person who's granting permissions and making the changes to be reviewing the changes. So what does that permission structure, what does that approval structure look like?
Yes, so,
And again, that may not be something we need an answer on right now.
Today, right.
That could be a bigger discussion for
but this is
administration.
literally pulling from the existing policy.
Yeah.
So all grade changes will be reviewed annually. We would assume that's already happening, because it's in the policy. And so if you're able to answer that, how is that done, who does it? Just so we can flesh it out
Okay,
better in the policy.
yeah, we'll give you the answers to both of those inserts.
Great.
Thank you. And the final question, and end with a bang, is the last sentence on the last page, page 6. Any changes to this policy or accompanying regulation will be made with consideration for the uniformity of course grades within each grade level cohort to ensure that final GPAs of all students in each graduating cohort are directly comparable and reflect consistent uniform standards and grading practices throughout the cohort's high school experience. That's a mouthful.
That was our attempt.
That was our
To
attempt.
fix.
Right, to ensure that the goals of grading are actually met for every student. Is this clear? Does it make sense? Is it practicable? What do we need to do here to sort of make sure our goals are clear in policy and the philosophy around fairness and accuracy and comparability are reflected?
Right, and this was to take very seriously parent concerns that changing the grading system, the way it's been changed, where a student in a cohort, students in cohorts have taken different weighted classes at different times, where the weighting is now changing. And one student may have gotten the benefit of the 0.5 bump up, and now another student in the same cohort is only getting 0.3, and that, as we talked about, this really is impacting the students who are trying to get the highest GPAs, but also actually, to be fair, any student who's applying to college, I know it's going to be reflected in the student profile, but just, we're trying to make sure these students are being treated fairly along the way through high school, and they're not having unintended negative consequences happen to them. And that's what this very long sentence was trying to accomplish.
So we're trying to accomplish whatever grading system you come in on the first day of ninth grade, everything should stay the same through senior year.
Yeah.
For your
cohort.
For your
Yeah, so your
It doesn't say
But it doesn't say that.
It says will be made with consideration of.
I was reading
Consideration of,
the
yeah.
conversation, not the.
Not the-
Yeah, so
They're very different.
yes, that's wishy-washy, that's our saying we aim to.
Mhm.
You're right.
Okay, we
So
move that.
I think will be made with consideration. I think
Yeah.
it's hard to put a future decision into a very clean and tidy box that may not be able to be accomplished. So I think the phrase will be made with consideration of, it's a philosophical statement, and hey, please keep this in mind if we come back to change this policy.
But that still means that, in theory, quote unquote, students could be harmed by a change.
So we have to take out the with consideration for.
But in making it more specific and sort of making that box smaller, we also preclude the possibility that positive changes down the future could positively impact more students if they cannot be executed within the language of the policy. So it's
I
a
also think
balance.
this is an opinion question. Like, the answer to this question is an opinion. You might have two people, let's pretend they're parents, two parents that see one as appropriate change, the other one sees it as an inappropriate change. So they may both be right from their perspective.
See, this is where my do no harm thing comes in. Like, I just think if we had, policy shall not be changed if it results in any harm to any child, like I just, well, because that really needs, to me, that always needs to be the overarching thing. Just no unintended negative consequences to a student. How do we avoid that? Even if it may mean, look, if we weren't in the age of a computer, right, and the teachers were all doing this manually like they used to, there wouldn't be any issues. They would automatically say, okay, I can do the 0.5 here and I can do the 0.3 here and that's fine. It's because we are computerized now, I think this becomes more difficult for teachers, even if it may be unfair for students. I'm just saying, I've been thinking about when we had a staff member here who said, and maybe it was Dr. Feeney who said, this is more difficult for the teachers if we have to go in and have two different grading systems. Whereas if we were back in the paper and pencil days, it wouldn't be difficult. And so the question is, the overriding, I will say as a board member, the overriding concern shouldn't be that it's more difficult for teachers. It should be what is right for the students. And so that's what we're trying to say in the sentence.
Right, and I think, Dr. Shields, to your point, that's exactly what we struggled with, were the sort of subjective connotations around negative and positive, and what we got to was that whether the results are perceived as positive or negative, they are at least neutralized for that entire cohort because they're all the same, right? So that's, I think, what we're trying to avoid, are the sort of subjective discrepancies between views of what change is positive, what change is negative for students within the same exact graduating cohort.
Yeah, and we don't know how to say it in words, in policy.
But it's understandable why that's so difficult, because it's a very challenging dynamic if there's any shift in practice. So I'm empathetic with your situation of trying to come up with something that's clear in a context that isn't always clear. So that's why I think your phrase that you have in here, will be made with consideration for, is a philosophical approach that I think everyone would agree with.
But we already know it's the
Contentious.
aspiration is already not achieved
Right.
before we've even passed it.
Understood?
Right, it's this sentence that has brought us to this room, right?
And we've been talking about consistency, and we are in violation of our philosophical goal of consistency.
But again, I think that's to Dr. Shields' earlier point, some of it is a matter of perspective, you know, and in other words, the decision to change the grading system at a date and time rather than change it, you know, for a cohort, I don't think disadvantages or harms kids. I think but I do think that that the opinion that's been voiced is valid, but I don't think it disadvantages or harms kids, because we've taken, some painstaking steps to ensure that by contacting colleges and universities, by doing a pretty thorough survey, having our new director of guidance take the lead in that to make sure that we were comfortable with that change as it was articulated. And so based on that research, we were comfortable in that it would not harm students. So I just don't want you to have the impression, the policy committee to have the impression that the changes that have been implemented by the high school with respect to the changes in weighting, because of the way in which they've been implemented, are going to harm a student. We've been assured that they won't.
Well, how do we make this sentence needs, somehow this is an important sentence. And despite those assurances, as a board, I know we want this sentence to make sense and have meaning. So perhaps we rework this somehow to make sure it reflects the intent of what the committee is trying to say, and it doesn't have to be right this second, right? Because this is the first pass at this very comprehensive document. So we agree this sentence needs to, we have questions among the three of us. Does this say what we wanted to say? Are we picking the right English words, and the right juxtaposition of words? And so maybe either we as a committee work on this, or we as a committee work with the two of you on, and Mara chime in, because this really is the bottom line, in addition to all the other philosophical things. I don't see this grading system changing in a major way. Again, it took, 30 or 40 years for us to get here? And I won't be here on so many levels in 30 or 40 years. So, but we just want to make sure that the students are protected as a philosophical board perspective for whoever is sitting in these chairs down the road.
And I think what also makes it hard with the language is you kind of can't say that they won't be harmed. So because I can make the argument they're not harmed, but if their GPA is lower, then the argument is they were harmed, because if they would have had a 0.1 higher, but then you would never be able to change anything down. You could only go up. So, and that's where I think I'm struggling to try how to do it, is because any change.
You can go down,
even
but
if
if
you
you
went
start
up.
with ninth graders,
Right.
then everybody is
Everybody's the
still on the same plane.
Well, but the argument even for the ninth graders is, well, if you didn't change it, I would have gotten a 1.5, and now I'm getting a 1.3, so my grade would have been higher.
No,
But
they
that's not what you're I think that's
No.
not what you're trying to
No,
avoid.
they-
But I'm saying that's why you can't necessarily, it's hard to just say that you won't be harmed, because that is a harm.
Yeah, but
Not what you're trying
We
to,
can think of language for this. We can try to come up with some language for
Okay,
this
great.
too. I just had one more question
Yes,
for you to
yeah.
just consider. The
if
sentence
anything that we
before,
haven't even gone through this.
the sentence before says the superintendent shall present any recommendations for changes to this policy or accompanying regulation to the board, and shall do so within sufficient time for the board to act upon and adopt them before the new school year. So will the board be adopting the regulation?
I think we had talked about taking and
And
adopt
adopt-
out.
and adopt the
because-
policy.
Well, to act upon them, whether it's the policy or if there's some,
Act upon them. Okay, we can take out and adopt. No, the board will not be adopting.
No, the board will adopt the policy.
Policy, but not regulation, because
We've
we
never
don't
done.
adopt any regulation, we just kind of weigh in, but, yeah. So we can take out, for
And
the
ensure
act
that the
upon.
regulation is compatible with the policy. I think that's the extent of
Yeah.
our.
So that can come out. I know this was given to you on Monday. Was there anything that either of you wanted to raise with us today? Because obviously this is going to be here for a while, so there's time.
Not at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the work, yeah.
I had fun. Did you have fun?
So
So much fun. Okay, it's 10:23. Much as I would like to get to student records, I'm not going to because we do have community members here and I would like to take community comments. I will simply say that student records is back here because we are, we'll see this at our next meeting, because we are synthesizing and making this policy consistent now with the directory information subset policy that was recently amended and adopted and is completely within the law, I will say parenthetically speaking. Okay, community comments. Any community comments?
I just want to start by saying thank you so much for doing this. I can see you've spent a lot of time and really sort of looked far and wide for different policies, and it really means a lot, I think, to the parents who are really paying close attention. I hear coming up a lot that do no harm sort of is our overarching goal maybe, or aspirationally. And I'm just wondering if that could somehow make it in the philosophy section. And if that were in the philosophy section, that might give you a little more, I don't want to say cover, but a little more of a through line from what you really, if that is sort of the aspiration and the goal, that no student should be harmed by any of these policies, it might make sense there as a suggestion.
Yes. And then we have to decide if we make it a mandate, no student shall be harmed, or it is the board's aspiration that, and that's going to be the conundrum.
And that's where the magic happens.
And I expect our lawyer or counsel may have some thoughts on that.
And I think it kind of dovetails into the conversation that we, had is, no harm. Do we mean that, the grade can never go, could be lower?
It would require some definition and nuance.
Yes.
Yeah, but I agree, it is
And that may be-
it should be at the beginning.
And that may be what
Yeah.
the board's decision is, there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But from the conversations, I'm not hearing that.
I
I'm
can
hearing-
explain it to you offline, because
Yeah.
it's been a topic of conversation here, and I'll help you parse through the nuance.
I just have a 3 questions. So the first one is, are there, does this policy encompass, or are there separate policies for students with IEPs and/or 504 plans that are in gen ed classes, so not in MILE or INVEST? That's my first question.
Can we answer it?
Yes.
We had actually talked about whether there should be a section, because in another district.
There's a carve-out section, particularly in districts that have policies that apply to regions, because there's a regions carve-out for students with disabilities. But because we didn't include that kind of language on regions, we didn't include that. And we did talk about whether there needed to be specific language, sort of, instead of saying, this grading system, that the established grading system should apply to all students, whether we included, including students with disabilities and English language learners.
Well, and
I
also
think-
with
right.
With regard to students with disabilities, they have an IEP, so even if there's something in the policy that says, thou shalt take Regents, if in the IEP or in their plan or in their program, they are not going to be taking Regents, it would be, no, you need to take a Regents because it says in our policy, thou shalt take Regencies. So,
So is there a footnote that can be added that says, something like, the IEP is, this, and these, when, go ahead.
Sorry, I just,
Okay.
my greater point, the reason why I was asking, I just wanted to make sure I was on the right track, and I appreciate that you did start to consider that. So my overarching comment is, I really think that you would benefit from involving Stephanie Allen in looking at this policy, because the Regents is definitely one example. I know, now currently, right, we're not including Regents in exams, but for example, the OLS policy, kids that are in Algebra 1 IAS classes, their Regents were not included, in their grade. That was a carve out for them. And I would be, I don't know how many kids, I don't think that it's very a common accommodation in an IEP for a kid in a gen ed population to be exempt from a regents like straight away. Like I can't imagine, I don't know, that would seem strange to me, but anyway, so you don't have to get into the nitty gritty now. I just think that it would really benefit to like have a special education educator, because I don't believe there are any special ed teachers on the original grading committee at the high school level, and that was a comment I made, originally. So that's just my first comment, is I think you should get that input.
Can I follow up for a second with the administrators? I promise you. can
Sure.
continue.
No,
It is whether a student is required to take a Regents level examination, is that grading? Or is that more assessment? Is that covered any place else?
That's gonna be very unique to every child who has an
Does it need to be in
IEP.
policy?
No.
But I think, I agree
think-
that Dr. Allen should still look at this.
Yes, I think once we get to a draft that's pretty close to being complete, having her look at it is a very important step.
and just another, so my second area, like question, and I think it could have, benefit for kids with IEPs, but also other kids, something that I didn't see in here, and that I was wondering about was the ability to take courses pass-fail. I think, that could encourage, kids to explore other classes, to take risks. For example, in a foreign language, for example, there are a lot of, there are kids who are language exempt that may want to, try it out. But at the same time, they don't want to fail, they don't want to, you don't, no matter whether you think, your secondary plans are, you don't want to get a C or a D, you may not want to take that risk. So I think that's something that the policy around a pass-fail course, and again, maybe that's too nitty-gritty for your guys, for the Board of Ed policy, but it's a topic that I haven't heard come up ever, so I would just, whoever wants to think about that maybe could think about that.
I wanna get clarification. You're not talking about where the entire class, every student in the classroom is taking it pass-fail.
Correct.
You're talking about almost like a survey in college where you would audit a class.
Yeah.
And instead of taking it for credit, you're just kind of sitting there and you're doing it pass-fail. You may not necessarily get credit, but
Well,
you
you
want the
could get credit,
experience.
no, I think that you would get credit, like, so if you have 3 elective credits to graduate, I maybe, like, I wouldn't preclude the possibility of giving credit, but obviously that,
It
leave that to people who know about that.
These kinds of arrangements, though, wouldn't necessarily need to be part of the policy discussion, because there's nothing in the policy that would preclude the principal, for example, or somebody else to make that determination. So for example, if the Committee on Special Education made a determination in the IEP about grading, then the teachers would all have to follow what was made, regardless of what the policy is.
No, and I understood, although that often wouldn't be able to be done in time, like to be directly applicable for a school year, but I also, I didn't mean to limit my comments
And
to
yeah, any
IEP
student,
kids
any student.
as far as like the pass-fail aspect of that. I know that I think there is a section on it within the programming guide in high school, but I found it to be very restrictive, kind of like you have to, you have to decide way in advance. I don't know, I feel like there may be something to look at there. If not necessarily for you guys on the board at a policy level, because it's too specific, but maybe down like at an administrative level.
So it's currently in the programming handbook
There's
for
something
Schreiber. There's like
about
a
it.
little oblique kind of.
Yeah, it's kind of like I can't remember, it was pretty restrictive though, I think. And not widely available. And then my last question, sorry, just going back, I was interested in the comment, Dr. Passy, with the conversation that came up about curving grades. And I guess I would be wary of language that, I don't know where you came out on that, but I'd be wary of language that would preclude curving, for example, on a specific exam within a class, because, sometimes it is discovered that, the whole class, fails the test, maybe that test was, inappropriate in timing or length or subject matter. And I would just want, the policy to give the teachers that flexibility, and I can't remember where you guys came out on that paragraph.
Yeah, and we had specifically had that conversation, that curving is actually renorming an entire class
Entire
versus
class.
comparing students to each other, so.
And that, okay,
yeah.
okay, great. I think that's it for
We
me.
can go back in and just to make, we can make sure.
Yeah, or we can clarify the
We can
language.
clarify
Yeah,
the
there was
language
nothing in the,
and-
I don't believe there was
We
anything in
didn't
the
address
language that.
curving, but like,
that would
we can
preclude it.
specifically, there was nothing that would preclude it unless it was the interpretation
It
of the
was,
policy.
yeah.
So I think we can make sure to include language that.
And we removed that last
Remove
phrase
that
about
last phrase,
comparing
not
students to each
comparing
other.
Right, to each other.
Correct. Right, they're great in relationship to the established learning standards.
Right,
Which
and
does
so-
not, which in itself does not preclude.
Right, so if the teacher says, oh, wait,
Right.
this may not have been, we need to adjust it.
Yeah.
They'd be able to.
Anything else?
I just want to say thank you. This is great. It's great to see kind of the granular level of things. I did want to, I guess, chime in with how this policy lines up, and I think you guys were going to get to this either at a future date, but with the current attendance policy, because I think there were some shifts that do impact grading, but I think that may be more appropriate for later. And then just clarification on the current grading, like computer system, I feel like, well, a couple of things. I feel like one, we may at times be conflating changing the weighting in terms of the quarter weighting versus the honors weighting. Because it doesn't, to me, and I'm not sure I know the whole system, but it seems like the honors weighting really only happens when the GPA is calculated in junior year. So it shouldn't really, as far as I know, impact the teachers in terms of having separate grade books.
Say it again, I wanna make sure.
So the GPA is only calculated to the class as a whole, as far as I know, when transcripts are generated. So,
Kids file their GPAs like almost on a daily basis.
but that's the kids like follow it, like they do the math in their head. Like right now, a sophomore can't get their actual GPA, it has to go through the system,
The weighted GPA.
the weighted
Is
GPA.
that so?
It's calculated at the end of this, each school year,
Each school
on the
year.
bottom of the it's placed on the bottom of the transcript,
Each
but
school year beginning in ninth grade?
No, it's not, right now, it's not calculated until they get their actual transcripts
on the
for
transcript.
college.
but the transcript calculates, let me check, because
Okay, because
I remember mine, Sean, now granted, this was under Aspen, and I don't wanna like, blow her cover, but she was looking at that GPA on a weekly basis, if not on a daily basis.
well, you can see your,
Child,
like
you
each
understand.
class GPA. Like you can see your running grade for a course. But you can't see your weighted GPA.
I see.
So that is run by the, as far as I know, thus far, has been run by the computer system when we get transcripts for students at the end of junior year. So that shouldn't impact the teachers in terms of their grade book system or anything like that, because that's just purely the calculation that the computer system runs independent of the teachers after all grades have been given.
So you're saying the
So it's-
concern that was voiced to us is not really a concern? I mean, we didn't make this up, we heard this.
It could be a
But-
concern for the quarter
Right.
weight.
It's a gut, when Dr. Feeney brought it up, so my response to him was, so this is a problem in the guidance office / computer system. Yes, that is,
Sure.
that is
I
the
think how he explained it was it would have to, so you have one class and you may have to have like 4 classes in the computer system so that like it would be set up so that when the computer does the GPA, like the kids in this class, in class A, I'm just gonna say, get this, class B, get this, or depending on where it is. I think that's what he said, was it's in the computer system, it'd have to be set up as like different classes based on different categories.
And that would have to be the teachers were going to have to designate
Go
which
into the-
students were in which little class, because when we were talking about students in different cohorts taking the same class at the same
Right.
time, where if we changed it midstream, mid cohort for the 10th graders and the 11th graders. The 10th graders would be weighted with the old weight and the 11th graders would be weighted with the new weight, and or vice versa, whichever it was. And the teachers would have to tease out who those students were based on their cohort within the same class. That's what.
I guess it still doesn't make sense to me because the transcripts are not run together. Like those sophomores who took, let's say, AP Stats this year, their transcript is not being calculated at the same time as the juniors who took it this year in that class. They're
Right, but if you have two students in different cohorts in the same class, the weight that will be assigned to them will be different.
But it's
At
not
the end.
assigned by the
She's saying
teacher.
it's not done until the computer does it.
But the
then
teacher,
the
the teacher has to
teacher doesn't-
determine which student, I don't know how it works, I'm just saying what I heard
The
him
teacher doesn't determine
say.
which grade the student's in.
No, but they
just
have
give
to-
the student their grade, it goes into Infinite Campus.
Right, but they have to be the ones, I imagine, or maybe guidance, I don't know how
I
it
can
works,
try to
but
explain
we
it.
were told
Yeah.
that it was difficult.
Go ahead.
I understand what you're saying,
Yeah, I don't know, I guess it's
but logistically, I don't know what the reality is.
Yeah, so I
Who
did
does
pull up
what?
a transcript, you're right, it's calculated at the end of, at the end of the junior year, and it's just a cumulative GPA. The
Yeah.
issue is that the way that the course is set up, so if you're in AP US History, for example, you set up the weighting per course. So if there are kids that are assigned that have different weighting that are in the same class, they would have to be in two different courses, is what that means, meaning in the computer system, not physically in the building. So this same system also does our scheduling. So in order to make sure then that a class isn't overloaded and that we've got the appropriate balance, it falls into that. It's just prone to more error. It's not, as we said from the start, it's not impossible, it's just prone to more error and it's more cumbersome.
And how do we do it for the double skip students in sixth grade who are registered in two, like, because at the middle school, the way it works with the houses, like they switch quarterly and they switch every other day. So often the sixth graders who are in double skip will be in one class with one cohort of kids on A days and a different one on B days. So they're registered in an entirely separate class. So is there a way to do that model potentially with the small cohort of kids who have this overlap? And it would really just be for a couple of years while we get through kind of the couple of years of transition.
I think you're talking about double skip, which is like normally a handful of kids versus
Right.
hundreds and hundreds of kids.
Well, wouldn't it just be the handful of kids who take stats or an AP class kind of early, or like, it's really just a few classes, right? There are only so many courses where you have a mix of grade levels.
So many weighted courses.
Yeah.
That's interesting, because the double skips don't get weighted.
It was just a model to follow for how they kind of work it out at the middle school with having different cohorts together and kind of creating separate grade books.
We can,
Something to complicate things.
so the best way perhaps is we can have you speak directly to Dr. Feeney, and I'm sure he can provide more fulsome responses to
Okay.
your questions.
You raised an interesting point.
I know attendance was on our agenda
Yes.
for today. We're
Yes.
not gonna get to it,
No.
obviously, but Ms. Smith did raise a question about the relationship between these two policies. So if there is anything specific that you wanted to call out, because we will be bringing it back at the next meeting.
With that, I'm not sure exactly what the policy is, but something I had read was in terms of and I think it was a change this year possibly with the number of absences, that the current language, at least on the website, is that students who miss, I believe it's 15%, have an automatic fail with no option for discussion, and it includes excused absences, any kind of absence. So I was just wondering how that is in line with the current kind of not, like, not
Not-
penalizing.
If you could show me that, I'd be glad to look into that.
Sure.
So yeah, sneak peek of next
If you
month,
email
because I
that,
expect
you
this will
email
come
that to
up.
me, I wanna make sure,
Yeah,
we're reading it the same way.
yes.
My daughter would have failed every year. She was out sick every month for a week, no fail, without, I mean. yeah.
It's on our, it's already on
It's
our
on there,
radar
yeah.
for the discussion.
Great.
So
So thank you for.
it's already something
Sure.
we've been talking about.
Okay, I can send it to you.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Okay, all right, with that, with no further questions, okay, let's make it here through the holiday season. Wishing everybody happy holidays, safe holidays. Tune in to our board meeting where we will be discussing what we did today, especially with respect to grading. Or somebody on this committee will be. And we come back, we come back on here.
Sick.
You won't be.
Minus 15%.
Yeah. On January 23rd, we will resume at 10 o'clock in the morning unless there's been a further change. January 2026.
This year's flying.
Yes,
Holy
this
moly.
year. For policy, this year is over. I look forward to
We have so much more.
I look forward to administration's comments. Thank you very much for being good sports about this. We really try not to surprise you with anything. Thank you for all the comments as always. Thank you. Great.